Welcome to the fifth annual event celebrating PR women who changed history. I'm Shelley Spector, founder and director of the Museum of Public Relations. First, let me thank our wonderful sponsors whose support made tonight possible. First, the Page Center for Integrity and Public Communication, and especially its officers, Denise Bortry and Bill Nielsen. Want to thank also our academic partner, Grady College at the University of Georgia, and particularly its chair, Brian Reber. Also want to thank Talkwalker, the Page Society, Race Point, Elon University's Interactive Media Center, Hunter PR, Reagan Germinder, the PR Council, North American Women in PR, Fin Partners, Omnicon Group, Muckrack, and finally Compro, especially its magnificent miracle maker, CEO Faye Shapiro. And by the way, you should tune into the Compro podcast tomorrow with Michael Zeldin and Aishia Mills, both political commentators at CNN. Let me also thank Jenny Frankel, my associate, and the dedication, talent, and sense of humor she brings to work every day. PR is an industry that today is 80% women. But not long ago, if you were a woman in PR like Barbara Hunter or Muriel Fox, you would frequently find yourself to be the only woman in the room. This article on the slide will give you a sense of how PR women were portrayed in the press some 70 years ago when Barbara and Muriel started out. Note the use of the phrase PR gals. That's what we were called, as in, get me that PR gal, I need some press. Note also the employment advertising by gender. There were women's jobs and there were men's jobs, and never the twain did meet. And the great majority of professional PR jobs back then were for men only. This is against the law today, by the way, thanks largely to the work of Muriel and the National Organization of Women, which she co-founded in 1966. Tonight's program covers some of the early PR professionals who have been left out of the history books, such as Gertrude Bailey, to be presented by LaShonda Edie and Karen Russell. It's also about women who have changed history through PR, such as those female pioneers on the Oregon Trail that Donald will tell you about. We'll also be exploring the use of PR for peacemaking, thanks to Dina Merriam, who'll also note the special characteristics that women bring to the negotiating table. And we'll find out what the industry holds for women of the future, according to Fatu Barry, one of our most successful millennial bloggers. Tonight, to make tonight even more special, we'll be choosing 3 people in the audience to get signed editions of these 3 books. We'll be picking the names out of a hat tomorrow morning, and we'll let you know the winners by email. Now I'd like to introduce to you your moderator for this evening, Charmian Kinder, CCO of Global Citizen. Charmian has had one of those dream careers in PR, working as a press secretary for Michelle Obama, handling CSR for Disney, and today, head of PR for one of the world's most renowned nonprofits, Global Citizen. In fact, earlier today, the organization announced a massive new global program to end the pandemic. Charmian?
So we are here to discuss PR women who changed history, using PR for public good. And as Shelley alluded to, I am currently the head of PR at Global Citizen. Great honor to be connected with millions of change makers around the world who are focused on eradicating extreme poverty. I got into public relations with one vision, which was to help inspire kids towards excellence. And I've done that in a number of different ways throughout my career. Obviously, because of all the women who are on the line, I almost said the phone, through this event this evening, but then also with a very square determination to ensure that I was using messages for good. And so at Global Citizen, currently, we've launched a recovery plan for the world. We're working in conjunction with Gavi and CEPI and the World Health Organization. And thankfully, the United States of America under the Biden administration, a number of other world leaders, including Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission, as well as 20 other countries on an effort to really reclaim the world. And we're focused on COVID-19 eradication first, really making sure that there is equitable distribution of the vaccine around the world, not just in the United States, but we know that the pandemic will not end and no one is safe until everyone is safe. And so we are very focused on that mission. We've launched a plan. It's also focused on education. It's also focused on ensuring that people are food secure and also ensuring equity and justice. And there are 5 plans, 5 prongs to the plan, excuse me, at Recover for the World. And so how I got into this, I actually used to work as well for the White House under the Obama administration for a leader named Michelle Obama. That was incredible. There are a number of reasons why I got into that. I was working at the Ad Council in DC and also in New York, and really sort of kept doing critical campaigns that focused on childhood obesity prevention and diabetes awareness, and really just making sure that kids could get up and play. We did some good work with the NFL. But one thing that I always had to write about, and I always saw in the talking points, was that Black and brown children are disproportionately more susceptible to fill in the blank. Not go to college, potentially not have the financial backing they need to be successful adults, potentially not having housing security, or potentially coming from homes that are less than stable. And I took that very personally in my writing. It's really a turning point where I went from just doing public relations to focusing on doing campaigns that actually made a difference in the world. And I think that's a lot of us on this telephone where we want to, I keep calling it a telephone, I'm a little old school, on the video conference, where we want to make sure that the campaigns that we are working on together actually influence social good. And so I went and worked for the Obamas with the full intention that putting a very capable, well-intentioned, smart, and focused family on TV every single day with really wonderful things to say about how to move the country forward was an excellent communications campaign to be a part of. And I ended up moving to Missouri, organizing for that campaign. At the time we won the election, and then I moved to DC and had a chance to work in the Department of Commerce, in the White House, as I mentioned, and also as Assistant Press Secretary at HUD. In all of those stops, what was really imperative was bringing some of the knowledge I had from the private sector into the federal government. And so my training had been at Edelman, it had been at the Ad Council, and had been in a number of nonprofits that focused on public good. And the goal was to make sure that we were actually looking at all of America when we were thinking about policies that were going to impact people. And whether that's the LGBTQIA community or the Native American community, or as we know is critically important, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, it is important that communicators really understand and that there are people around the table from these communities to champion effective messages to do great in the world. And so I've been able to continue that work. I look forward to being able to continue this work as I go forward. And with that, we're going to dive into a really solid conversation with other women who have made a commitment to using their careers to do public good. I'll start with an introduction of Grace and Grace Leong. She's the CEO and partner of Hunter PR. Grace is a passionate advocate for a modern practice of integrated marketing communications. Recently named Champion of PR by PR Week, Grace elevates the role of PR in the marketing mix among Hunter's best-in-class clients in consumer products and services by infusing programs with new technologies, resources, and solutions that drive business results. In a career spanning more than 30 years, Grace has conceived and led dozens of award-winning communications programs and initiatives for Fortune 100 consumer products, including 3M, Johnson & Johnson, Church & Dwight, and Pumpkin. And I've said that incorrectly, I apologize. Classically educated with credentials from public relations and professional marketing careers, Grace embraces her role as a female lead of diverse communications in a consultancy that is driven by creativity, exceptional client service, and dedication to measurable business results. I'm not a fan of the spotlight herself. Grace believes in doing great work every day. She sets the best leadership example and can often be found in brainstorms next to big ideas or in PR strategy sessions with people inside of her firm. Her skills and her communications expertise come in handy at home as well. She's a mother of 4 young adults who enjoy challenging their parents with their own academic and athletic objectives every day. And so excited to turn it over to Grace who will be talking to us a little bit more about the history of PR.
Charmian, thank you so much. I'm slightly embarrassed that you had to read that whole long bio. It's not important, but what's important today is I think I have, I have to follow you and the example and your story of, being from the White House to local communities and doing social good is so inspiring. And I have to say, and I think you would agree with me, you were able to be in the White House all the way down to local communities because of the two women we're going to talk to right now. We're going to talk to two legends of public relations. And we're going to talk to Muriel Fox and Barbara Hunter. And, I've had the pleasure of introducing and speaking with these women before, thanks to the graciousness of the Museum of PR. And of course, you probably didn't guess, Barbara was my first boss, my only boss, and my mentor. So I know these ladies pretty well, but I really hope in the next 30 minutes you get to know them as well, because they laid the groundwork for all of us on this phone today. And, single-handedly, Barbara has shaped who I am. So everything you just read, Charmian, really came from the hand of Barbara Hunter. So let's talk about Muriel Fox. Muriel, let's see your face. And Barbara, let's see your face as I go through this part. So Muriel Fox, just a couple of fun facts. If you don't know, this is the lady who founded Now. And again, none of us would be sitting here with these fancy titles and in the White House and commanding the C-suite without the efforts that Muriel did to break down economic barriers, legislative barriers, and pave the way for the rest of us. So we're going to hear from Muriel and what it was like when she faced those barriers. And then, of course, we're going to hear from my mentor, Barbara Hunter, the first woman to own a major PR firm in the United States. And, the woman who then at age 62 did it all over again and started yet another firm. And also the first woman who partnered with her sister, another legend of PR, to run that PR firm. So there are so many stories here. I wish we had more than 30 minutes, but you're going to be riveted by what they have to say. And if you've heard it before, I'm telling you, you can't hear it enough. So stick with us. So I'm just going to shoot some questions at my friends Muriel and Barbara, and we've got the chat open. So we're going to have some Q&A at the end. So here we go. Okay. So we're all sitting here in 2021, and I look around my agency and we look at the panel here and we look at the faces and all the names who have signed up, and there's lots of women. There's lots of women in the public relations business, but there wasn't, right, Barbara? Right, Muriel, in the 50s, the 60s, right, and the 70s. Muriel, let's start with you. What was it like when you were at Carl Bayer as an executive vice president? And where were the women? What was happening? Paint us a picture of what it was like.
Well, I'll start with when I was interviewed at Carl Bayer in 1950, and they said, sorry, we don't hire women except as secretaries. So I went away and took another job, but then I was hired in the radio and television department by a very enlightened man, Bob Davis, and he hired me. And then a couple of years later, when Bob became head of all the departments, to everyone's surprise, I got the job as head of the department, even though there was a man making much more money in the department. And I remember the CEO said to me at that time, well, Muriel, you've come far. We'll see if you've come too far. And then I remember when I became a vice president in 1957, the CEO said, well, you've come far, but you've come as far as you can go because CEOs can't relate to a woman. And it took Now, in 1966, to make it the law that you couldn't discriminate it. It wasn't the choice of CEOs or of the public relations magnates. They were forced to do it. And then, of course, they discovered the women were terrific at it, that women in many ways have a natural affinity for it, and they work very hard. And we always used to say you have to work twice as hard, and the women did. And so that's how it happened. But when I started out, there were just about no women in public relations. For one thing, practically everybody came to public relations then from the media. And, and the reporters, of course, were all men also. So it was all men. And now I think people come from public relations courses at universities and from marketing, from other sources, and maybe very few from the media. And of course, in the media, there are women, though again, not at the top, just as in public relations, there are very few women at the top.
Yeah. Okay, Barbara, what was it like? 50s, 60s, even 70s, when you and your sister were the lone women walking the hallways?
Well,
Take us
right.
back.
Yeah. When, as Muriel said, well, first of all, I want to say hello to everybody who's involved here and to thank Shelley and her staff and everyone for putting this on. I think it's great. Um, yes, when I started in, well, I was on a trade newspaper, and then I found out you could make more money in public relations. So I took a job in, I think, around 1950 with National Dairy Products Corporation. And that was great until um, after 2 years, I left to have my first child. And they said they would hold my job for me. And so when I came about 3 or 4 weeks later, no job. They had filled it and didn't live up to what they had promised. So that was how we were treated by men. And I remember going to the PRSA luncheons at the Waldorf, and there'd be 150 men and maybe 5 women. And of course, it's totally different now. Um, it's very interesting, as Muriel said, the pay discrepancies were serious. And in the, well, let me go back and paint a picture of what it was like to work then. Of course, we worked on typewriters with carbon paper and mimeograph machines. If you had to revise a proposal or a report sort of at the end of the day, you had to retype it all over again. And sometimes we were in the office till really late hours getting prepared for meetings the next day. Um, and the other thing was the way we dressed then. I would go to work with a hat, maybe with a veil, and white gloves, possibly a suit with a skirt, um, heels, and stockings with seams down the back that you had to make sure was straight. Uh, Everything was slower. We used the mail and telephones. We didn't have, well, we could use the telex at times and telegrams, but you had to stuff a lot of envelopes with your releases and photos and things and get them off. And even the meetings, you traveled to meetings. I spent a lot of time on DC-3 airplanes that had whoopee bags, and we would be bouncing around in the lower stratosphere. Um, but everything is so fast today. Um, the other thing, when my sister and I, who were both at DAY, which was the agency that I eventually worked at, I think I started there in 1956.
And then you bought it right after that, Barbara, right? It wasn't soon after when you and your sister bought that firm, right?
Well, we bought it in 1969 when two of the partners had died, and they offered the firm to the 10 vice presidents, and but they had no plan for how it would be run. And so my sister and I made an offer and to a third partner who didn't die, and he accepted it. And so we bought out his interest, and most of the men in the firm left with their clients and so on. So we were left with a lot of real estate, and our clients, which were mostly food related. And but we started off in saying we know about women, and that was our pitch when we first started out. But we gradually, um, broadened it out so that we were working for clients other than food companies and so on.
So So you both talked about some moments in time where, you know, kind of opened the door for women, and moments you had in your history that opened the door for women. Muriel, can you talk about the impact of now and how that all came about, and what do you think it did? I mean, the industry is now 80% women. What were those doors that were opening throughout that period that really led to this, you know, this women dominated business now? Can you recount some of those?
Well, in 1966, there were almost no women in public relations or any profession. Uh, and we had to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had said you must not discriminate, but they didn't mention on a basis of gender. So we had to get gender in there. And of course, the congressional record indicates that the congressman laughed when this was brought in. It was really brought in to defeat the entire Civil Rights Act. They thought if they put women in there, then that would defeat the whole act. But we got the act, and then what now did was they made sure that the law was enforced, and then we had to have quotas, and we had to have affirmative action, and which meant that women and minorities had to be considered because of past discrimination. And it, as I said, once people started hiring women, they said, well, they're pretty good. And so more and more women moved ahead. So that's where we are today. But before now, it was, you could say, I don't hire women. And the help wanted ads were help wanted male, help wanted female. We made it illegal. And of course, today you cannot discriminate. But we had a march. We had to lobby our Congress people. It was a hard fight, and I hope today's young women understand that it took a fight, and they still have to fight. But that if you fight, you'll win, because
Well, you're a great example of that, Muriel. You fought and you won for all of us. So we are grateful, and we do think of you about all the things you did to open doors.
I think there were some other factors at play too. There were a number of women's organizations that were formed in the PR field itself, and you know, the women executives in public relations and women in communications, and there was a PR part of the Advertising Women of New York, for example. And the other thing is that there started to be more communications departments in the colleges and universities, and women were very drawn to the communications. They felt that it suited their capabilities. They were good writers, they were good listeners, they were good at creativity, and you know, I think they found that the field was very very positive for them. And the other thing that happened too, I think that in the early days, executives in companies and other organizations didn't know anything about PR. It was not taught in the business schools, and they really had no idea what it could do for them. There were a few enlightened ones, like one of our clients at Tabasco, you know, the McElhenney company started doing public relations in the early 1940s, and they're still doing it, aren't they, Grace?
They sure are.
So I think that there were a number of factors, but even in the 80s, the AY that my sister and I were running then was the only firm run by women in the top 25 firms in the country. So it was slow growth, but it's still growing.
I think there is still prejudice against moving women up to the top. I remember a very nice news editor at ABC Network. He was a lovely guy, but he said to me, women can't be bosses. They can't tell other people what to do. And I think there's still prejudice against women bosses. This is a problem, but I think it's moving ahead. and we're getting there. I remember Betty Friedan, who was the founder of Now and the greatest leader who changed the world, uh, used to make fun of women who said, I'm not a feminist, but I want to be CEO of IBM. Well, today we have a woman CEO.
Yes, we do.
And,
Yeah.
and it took the women's movement, plus these women doing just a great job to move them up. We had to get them into the pipeline and then to move them up. But women bosses are still an all too rare species, including in public relations.
Yeah. I think that's so true, Muriel. I mean, we definitely see the market is flooded with women. I mean, I know that, you know, running a women founded firm, a women run firm, and certainly mostly women, but you're right, there's still bias. Barbara, I think you have an interesting story about a man who you might have changed his mind about women leading an account or something. You want to tell us that? That's one of my favorites. You can't tell it to me enough. Beautiful story.
Sure. Well, one of the presentations we made was to the city of Little Rock. And we worked on it. We sent people to Little Rock. They interviewed people there. They took pictures and so on. So that when the committee came to find a PR firm, why they came to DAY, and we had our whole conference room just plastered with photos of Little Rock and so on, and played interviews. And so we got the account, and I had the job of going to Little Rock and doing more research after we won the account. And I had to make speeches to the Chamber of Commerce and other business leaders and various groups in Little Rock. And one night after I had talked, this man came up to me and he said, I never thought we would ever hire a firm headed by women, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah. So you turned him around, you know, by showing your work first, and that it could have come from the best professional, and despite your gender, you were the best, and he admitted it.
Yeah. There was another instance where we were invited to make a presentation to not a consumer company, and so we were delighted, and we worked hard on it and made the presentation, and we didn't get it. And the public relations director, later told my sister that we were never in the running, but they just wanted us to be included so they could say they heard from a firm headed by women.
Oh, so
Yeah.
kind of you were involved in the pitch to meet a quota or to say that they met women.
No, we never had a chance, and we had spent all this time and effort. Yeah.
Muriel, tell the story about what happened in that conference room at Carl Bayer. I love that story when you tell it, when you put your hands on the desk and you said, you know, watch me. Tell us that story.
Well, there was a meeting of all the executives at Carl Bayer, and the CEO made some reference. I don't know how it came about, but he made a joke about, soon they're going to say we have to hire women, or we can't discriminate against women, And I stood up, I was trembling, and I said, next week in Washington, D.C., an organization called Now is going to be started, and it's going to make it illegal and enforced for discrimination against women. And that's what happened. And frankly, it wouldn't have happened. We all could have been wonderful and smart and worked very hard, but without the law making them hire women, we would have just gotten nowhere. So you do have to work to change the world. You do have to work to change the laws.
Yeah, and if anybody has time, check out the Museum of PR. The press release that announced the creation of Now is in the museum. It's one of the most important documents, I think, of our industry, and it has Muriel's name on it. For immediate release, contact Muriel Fox. I mean, nothing better than that, right?
Right.
PR, working hard.
You reminded me today, Grace, that I typed that press release on a mimeograph.
Of course you did, girl.
Yes. Yep.
I did an pencil.
I remember those machines.
In the office of Senator Phil Hart. His wife was on our board of directors, and we went around by hand. But the point was that all the newspapers in the country put it on the front page. They knew this was big news, and they knew it was going to change the world. And we were making history, and we did.
Muriel, that story, you just can't tell it enough. And we have, like, you know, illustrations of it thanks to the museum. It's just a wonderful, it makes my core so warm, and I'm just so happy to hear it. Barbara, you have a story about equalizing pay within your organization. Again, one of my top 10 Barbara Hunter stories. Can't tell it enough. Tell me about that.
Well, when we took over the management of the firm, we were left with a whole lot of empty real estate because the guys had left. And when we looked into the records of the firm, we found that the men were being paid much more than the women in same positions. So the very first thing we did was to equalize the pay of men. We still had a few men, but we equalized the pay for the men and women. And that was really very important to us.
And so you obviously brought the women up to the men. You didn't drop the men, right, Barbara?
That's right. No, we brought the women up to the level of the men. Yeah.
What was the reaction of the women when you did that? When you and your sister walked out of the finance with the ledger and said, "Hey, ladies, this is the way it's going to be"?
Well, we didn't do it quite that way. It was a little more subtle, but yeah. We had a very dedicated staff, and they were really delighted. And the men that stayed with us did very well. And, you know, I think they were glad that they made the choice. But the ones who wouldn't work for women, they went off, and I never heard from them or about them again. They went off into the nether world or someplace.
Yeah, well, they're not in the history books, but you two are. So maybe, sorry, bad choice. You know, speaking of women in the workforce, this year was, everybody knows, kind of tragic for women in the workforce. I mean, every news report shows how women through the pandemic have been hit the hardest, especially working moms. The stats are crippling. We're at a 33-year low for having women in the workforce. 2.3 million women have had to leave the workforce because of the pandemic. You know, we are really back to the time when we had to, you know, bring women back into the workforce. What advice do you have for us, knowing that you were working mothers and working moms and working women way back when? How do we create a better environment so that women do not have to leave the workforce? What do we have to do? Muriel, you change laws, you make big things happen. What do we have to do to make the workforce hospitable to working mothers and working women? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Two big words, childcare.
Yeah, there's some discussion about
has introduced a bill for childcare, and now got a wonderful childcare bill passed in 1972, and Richard Nixon vetoed it, and we're still fighting, and that's really the reason why women aren't doing even better. Because most of them do have two jobs. It's been much worse during the pandemic, but it hasn't been a bed of roses even before the pandemic. And until we have childcare, which brings the United States up to all the other countries in the developed world, women really cannot do for society what they're capable of doing.
I agree with that, yes. And I was going to mention that, well, I don't know whether it's a proposed bill yet, but it's been discussed, and I hope it will be.
Yeah, I've heard that childcare is one thing, but also how this culture of the United States values childcare providers. When you look at how we look at the profession of childcare, it's underpaid, it's under-resourced, and we don't value it as a culture, as something that's really going to help us, you know, get to the next level. So childcare, yes. And Muriel, I think you need to form another organization. We need to send out another press release, hit the front pages. And, so are you game? Because we need you.
We can have grandmas for childcare.
It's working very hard to have women, they're mostly women who work in childcare, honored for what they're doing and paid and given security and given benefits because it's such an important part of our society. But we have to have it until we have a universal quality childcare. We're not going to have an equal professional society.
So thank you. Barbara, you mentioned that you lost a position because you came back from maternity leave and the position had evaporated. But you then went on to run an agency with your sister, and between the two of you, you had 5 children. How did you do it? What was
We had good experiences and bad experiences. I was very lucky. With my first daughter, I managed to get a woman who had been a nanny for Lily Palmer's children, the actress, and she was Swiss. And we had her for 8 years, and she was like a second mother. I was really blessed. But when I had the second child, she didn't want to take care of another baby, and so she left while I was still in the hospital.
Oh.
And then I had a lot of bumpy roads. I had one woman that when I got back from a trip, I called the office and they said, well, your children are all right, but your caregiver was taken to Bellevue Hospital, a mental case, yes. And nothing had shown up in her references about her having any mental problems like that. But, and I had a series of people, but eventually we found somebody else that was very good too.
Yeah.
In those days, it was easier. There was a pool, mostly immigrants, mostly minority, mostly Black or Hispanic, of wonderful women who couldn't get any other job but were happy to take care of our children. So frankly, it was easier for us than it is for our daughters, because there's that pool of child care workers, domestic workers that doesn't exist today. And the young women, it's harder for them.
It sure is. And I see the struggle every day in my firm and with women. And it's not surprising that we're seeing these record numbers of women leaving the workforce now with the pandemic. So we feel for them and we appreciate any advice that you give. I have one final question for both of you guys before we go into some Q&A from the audience. Everyone's dying to talk to you. I mean, I can't even, the chat over here is giving me, cross-eyed, so many questions. So get ready for that. But one final question. Today, we're talking about women that are in the history books. And I know you're in the history books, Barbara, because that's how I came to work for you. I saw you in my textbook, which, by the way, I have right here. And you were in this textbook, and I read about you, and I said, I'm going to work for that woman. And Muriel, of course, you're in textbooks from, from east to west. But who do you think should be in the textbooks? Who are we forgetting? Who do we need to bring back? Women that you interacted with during your time. Name some names, because we need to go and find these women.
Betsy Plank, who is with Illinois Bell for a long time, and she was the first woman president of the Public Relations Society, and she also founded the Public Relations Student Society and was very, very active working with students all her life. And I think she should be added. And I'd like to suggest my sister, Jean Schoonover, because she did, we ran the business together, but she also did a lot of other things. She was president of the YWCA of the city of New York. She was on a commission for the military that went all around to bases around the world to decide whether women were being given the treatment they deserved and so on. And she was a wonderful friend and a mentor to me.
Yes, me too. Muriel, who are your names?
And of course, the one woman I have to mention, not in public relations, but that's Betty Friedan. And I hope everybody knows her name because she is the one who changed the world. I think she was the greatest woman of not just of the 20th century, but of the second millennium, because
Wow.
she wrote The Feminine Mystique. And every time I went out with her, a woman would come up to her and say, "You changed my life." And then, of course, she was the founder of Now, the first president of Now. And she wasn't easy to get along with, but she pushed us, she pushed the world uh, to create a better place and a more equal society. And don't forget the name of Betty Friedan. And can I just put in a plug? If you go to YouTube and then you go to Betty Friedan, Friedan, and you can put 100th birthday or you can put Veteran Feminists of America, you'll see the 1 hour webinar, which I'm very proud that I produced about Betty Friedan. And I promise you'll learn how it all happened.
Okay, that's must see YouTube, everybody. Bookmark it now. You heard it first from Muriel. Okay, so I'm going to take some questions. So Jenny, you might have to help me here. Am I looking at the chat for the questions, or are you going to help me out? Yes, I'm looking. Okay. All right, Q&A box. Okay. Okay, Q&A box would be, oh, there it is. I just found it. Okay. Oh my goodness. Wow, look at these bold-faced names. Okay, we're gonna go with Jessica Gallegos. Question for you ladies from Jessica. How did men react when women started taking over their positions? And how did you feel in the work environment? Got any more anecdotes on that?
I always got along very well with men. Frankly, I didn't really have sexual harassment, and because I think I did such a good job to be immodest, that they respected me. But the men, of course, as a class, resented women as a class, and of course they fought back, and they ridiculed the women's movement until they realized that a lot of the women could do it at least as well or better than the men.
One area that I remember was men reporters. And more than once I was called a flack. And one day I said, well, if I'm a flack, you're a hack.
That's right, Barbara. Come fight fire with fire. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so here's a question. It's really important. So we're now 80% women, but we're certainly, lacking in our numbers when it comes to women of color, particularly women who are BIPOC, right? So can you talk about any instances you saw about Black women trying to enter the field, or some inspiring stories that you can share for us, and any advice that you can share also about how we can do better to bring in more, faces of color into the public relations industry?
Well, we hired women who of color, and one time I remember I had to fire a junior executive of color because she just wasn't cutting it and wasn't really dedicated to what she was doing. And I thought about it and thought about it. And I think you might have been involved, Grace, in that. I don't remember. But anyway, we had a conversation and she left. And a couple of years later, she came back to see me and she said, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so when she really realized what she had to do and did it, why, she was successful.
Muriel, when you were doing all your work with Now, did you consider, you came off the civil rights movement, we talked about how that influenced the work that you were doing at Now. Where were women of color in that conversation at that point, and where weren't they?
Well, we had some, we should have had more, but it took, the people who first headed Now were professionals, and women of color just hadn't really gotten on the ladder yet. But our second president of NOW was Eileen Hernandez, who's Black. And today, the president of NOW is Christian Nunes, a very bright, young Black woman. So we're moving ahead. And frankly, you have to make laws to, to force employers not to discriminate. And then once they hire good people, then they say, hey, this is a new source of talented people that we can use. So we're getting there, but we're late. And
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Agreed. Very much agreed there. Another question from an old friend of mine, James Wyckoff. Hey, Jim. He has a question about the difference between advertising and PR. So advertising is not as female dominated as public relations. Why do you think that is? Any obvious reasons on that?
there's more money in it. That's what.
What, there's more money in advertising, and that's why
Money in advertising.
I see.
Probably so, yes.
Men flock there when they get out of college, and they have their choice of all the top people.
But there have been women who really went to the top in advertising. Ogilvy and Mather is run by a woman.
Shelley Lazarus. Yeah, she sure is.
Ellen Polycarp.
That's right.
Right.
And Lawrence, wasn't her? I'm trying to think.
Mary Wells
Wells Lawrence, yes.
Yeah, you're right. They seem to get to the top as well. That's good news for all of that. One other question for you guys. We always get these questions is because I think there's more than 300 folks on this call today, or that's what I was told. And a lot of them are young women trying to become you one of these days. You know, they all want advice. Where do you start? You know, and so that they can finish like you or go on the journey. So a couple of snippets of advice for young women who want to be you.
Well,
be a good writer, whatever job you're going for.
a good writer, yes.
Really learn how to be a good writer and then a good public speaker.
I was going to say the same thing.
Someone who will be respected when you walk into a room. And then try to have accomplishments outside the profession.
Oh.
So again, you will be respected as a person who's worthy of attention. So that's another good point I would certainly recommend.
Yeah, and hone your creative skills and also strategic thinking. I mean, those are very important in public relations. And be a good listener.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'll exercise speaker's choice for right now and just add one more thing. It's, you know, find women that inspire you the second you enter the field. And it doesn't have to be an icon, but it just has to be a group of women who prop you up, who tell you you can do it. And it could be in a professional society. It could be working with Shelley at the Museum of Public Relations, or it could be, you know, working with women alongside of you. To the mentorship and mentorship circles, they do more than just teach you the business or how to do things, but they give you the confidence to take on the day. And confidence, I think, is the key to succeeding in public relations and writing and all that stuff, but you gotta know that you belong. And I think your mentors will surround you with that, you know, energy to help you move forward. So
I found in my early career, I joined PRSA, I think in like 1956, and I found it very helpful because it broadened my view of public relations. It got me involved with people who were doing, you know, financial PR and nonprofit PR, all kinds of various fields, and it really broadened my perspective very much.
yes, spoken like a true past president and a gold anvil winner. Thank you both. Well, I think I'm out of time. I want to stay close to time, but, you know, Charmian, again, thank you for kicking this off. Shelley, the PR Museum, thank you for allowing time to hear from these legends. Ladies, you always kill it. Thank you so much. Look forward to going on to the next speaker.
Well, I mean, we must all give a round of applause at home. That was outstanding, outstanding, outstanding. I must say it again for everyone who is with us virtually. Muriel and Barbara, thank you, thank you, thank you for the vision, the tenacity, the stick-to-itiveness, and all of the things that you did to make it possible for us to be in the field of PR. We are beyond honored to hear all of your stories directly and just thankful for your service. Specifically on the organizing, because that's why I am able to sit here today. And so just so thankful for you. And thank you, Grace, for that incredible conversation. I'm not going to take any time away from Dr. Pomper, who we have is going to speak next. And I'm going to read a little bit about her bio, and we'll kick over directly to her. All right, so Dr. Donalyn Pomper, PhD, of course, with a media and communications doctorate from Temple University, is an endowed chair of public relations, the School of Journalism and Communications at the University of Oregon. She teaches courses and researches PR, corporate social responsibility, and social identity. She's an internationally recognized award-winning teacher and scholar. She has academic publishing and mentoring and career drives at her university. She also has edited 2 special issues of Mass Communication and Society, and she serves on 9 editorial boards. Impressive. She mentors numerous colleagues at various career stages and also supports their publishing goals, which is really important. We just talked about mentorship and leading the way for others to follow. So that's incredibly important. And prior to joining the Academy, Dr. Pomper worked as a PR manager and journalist with bringing 25 years of practical experience to her teaching and research. She worked in public affairs management for Campbell Soup Company, marketing, public relations management for Tasty Baking Company, where she created the PR department, so an innovator, as well as an account manager for Lewis, Gilman, and Kent. Dr. Pomper also worked for the daily newspaper as a freelance journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Courier Post, as well as news editor for the weekly New Jersey newspaper chain. And so we are excited to welcome you. She's going to share a presentation, and I am going to turn it over to you, Dr. Pomper. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Charmian. Wow, this is a tough act to follow. Bear with me, ladies. I will try to do justice to your legacy. Could we get my slides up there? There we go. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you to Jenny, to Shelley, to Faye, and all of the other women who have produced this event, and to the amazing panelists that I'm honored to share your sphere with during this Women's History Month. Before I jump into my talk, I want to bounce back to something that Grace said a moment ago when she said, well, you know, how come in our textbooks we're not reading about more of these amazing women? And that's a really nice segue for this presentation here, because I advocate for just that point. I advocate for opening our lens beyond the 20th century so that we can begin thinking about public relations work, activities, and skills as they played out before there were organizations and before there were media. So I'm going to speak with you this evening about some non-shrinking violets, women from history who've never really been considered in a public relations context. Instead, in our PR history chapters, we mostly read about the important work of Ivy Lee, Ed Bernays, and P.T. Barnum. But I'm going to talk with you about some 19th century women who served as caretakers, advocates, community builders of schools and churches, women who performed a civilizing function in terms of conflict management among diverse families, building relationships with indigenous communities when the men were mostly interested in killing them, and providing emotional connection for social cohesion. If those skills aren't public relations functions, then I don't know what is. But let's not romanticize, because these pioneer women were also complicit in colonizing and displacing indigenous peoples. Jenny, could you change the slide, please? Thank you. So speaking of romanticizing, when you think of women and manifest destiny, you probably think of the image in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That's a painting by W.T. Kerner, who created this work that he called the Prairie Madonna. This image symbolizes a pure woman, a woman who's fertile, a domestic woman. And you can see she's actually got a halo around her head, which is really the opening in the Conestoga wagon, but it makes her look like this ethereal creature from mythology, when in reality, women who crossed the country, as you can see on this authentic map, they looked a whole lot more like Ada McCall, who's in the lower right-hand portion. And I'm not sure if you can quite see what's in her wheelbarrow there, but it's petrified buffalo dung. This is more on the order of what women looked like as they were coming across the continent. They used this buffalo dung as fuel for fires because on the prairie, they couldn't find the kindling. So the travel from the jumping off point of Independence, Missouri, and some other towns, all the way across toward the Pacific Ocean, these women were traveling with their extended families, and some went to the more northerly direction to Oregon, some went the more southerly direction to California. And they learned a lot from the indigenous communities along the way because they were willing to reach out to them and visit their homes, their quote wigwams these women wrote about in their diaries. So if we could change the slide, I'd like you to introduce you to some of these really amazing women that I learned about by reading the diaries and reminiscences from a special collection at the Knight Library here at the University of Oregon. Whether you know it or not, it was a 3 to 4 month journey westward. We all know it as Manifest Destiny. And it took the spring through the summer and into the fall, unless, of course, you were a member of the Donner Party, which was a really violent and hard to read chapter of the Manifest Destiny event. So they arrived in the springtime and they had learned so much in the course of the journey so that by the time they settled in the Willamette Valley here in Oregon, they knew a whole lot more about how to get these new communities started. May I introduce you to Amelia Stewart Knight there in the top left? I'm going to go clockwise. She migrated in 1853 from Iowa. She was pregnant the whole journey, but not once in her diary did she talk about being pregnant. Instead, she talked about the care that she gave to her family, to the other people who traveled in wagons, building relationships among families who were traveling in the wagons, administering apothecaries by collecting materials, by collecting wildflowers and those kinds of things on the prairie, and helping women to deliver their babies. To the right of her is Cecilia Adams. She was a twin. She and her sister Parthenia Blank, they traveled across the nation when they were just 23 years old, and they were both married, and they came with their extended families to join a brother who had relocated just outside today's Portland the year before. These women were budding cartographers, and right below her image, you can see some drawings from her diary, and I made a little inset there of Independence Rock, which was pretty amazing for women in those days. To the right is perhaps one of the most famous women from Oregon history. That's Abigail Duniway. She was a leader of women's suffrage in Oregon, and she was instrumental in 1912 of making sure that Oregon was the first state to pass the women's suffrage amendment. In addition to waging this fight for women's rights, she also edited a newspaper. She started her own millinery shop. She took in boarders in her home. She started a school, and she cared for her own children. I think she had 5 children and her sickly husband. Moving all the way to the left there is Keturah Belknap. She left in 1848 from Iowa. She bore her 8th child on the trail, and she wrote extensively in her diary about burying the dead, which was considered women's work. And she also wrote about conflicts within the wagon camps and helping families to settle disputes so that they could move forward as a unit. So these women collectively performed many leadership functions. They served as managers, conflict resolution professionals. They were on the trail and doing this work almost single-handedly to build schools and churches once they set up camp colonies here in Oregon. This is so important to our thinking about women's power and the work that we perform today in public relations. And it's my hope that we can expand this history chapter in our public relations history textbooks to inspire the predominantly female student body we serve today so that they can see women like them in those pages. I really want to thank the Museum of Public Relations for allowing me to be part of this program. Thanks so much. Back to you, Charmian.
Fantastic, Donna. Thank you for that. I think, one of the themes that is going throughout our evening is really understanding where our profession comes from, understanding how it started. So when those days when we're working late hours and we may not be as thanked as we would like to be, we understand that this industry didn't pop out of thin air and that people had to think very critically about the steps they were taking. So we just really appreciate you for bringing that history to us. I know I learned something new and just thankful for the time that you shared, Donalyn. I want to make sure that we don't have any questions from the crowd on anything that Donalyn presented before we move on to our next presenter. And I'm looking in the Q&A just to make sure. Okay, it sounds like we are going to move on to Q&A later in the interest of time, Donalyn. So again, Dr. Pomper, thank you so much for the presentation and for your time. Next, I'm going to be introducing LaShonda, Dr. LaShonda Eady, as well as Karen. And so one of the things I want to do, Karen Russell Miller is an associate professor of Grady College, and she's also at the University of Georgia. I will share both of their bios, and they are going to tell us a little bit more about Gertrude Bailey, who is the first woman in corporate public relations. So we're going to continue our history lesson and get good substance from our time tonight. Karen Miller Russell is a Jim Kennedy Professor of the New Media and Josiah Distinguished Teaching Professor in the College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Georgia. She's a former editor of the University of Public Relations Research and studies media history with a special interest in public relations. She is the author of The Voice of Business, a Hill & Knowlton publication, as well as Promoting Monopoly, also published in 2021 on AT&T. She won the Institute for Public Relations Pathfinder Award in recognition for the original scholarly research that had made a significant contribution into the knowledge and practice of public relations. Thank you so much, Karen, for being here and for your patience with my bio reading. Dr. LaShonda Eady is a passion for public relations. She's taken her career from corporate communications to the classroom. Her passion for public relations is taken from her experience as a not self-proclaimed, but a self-modified and a practitioner scholar, and someone who actually practices public relations, but also teaches it in the classroom. She is an accredited public relations APR, a professor, and has spent time in the profession through the healthcare industry, most particularly. Dr. Eady, is a crisis history expert and has done investigations on crisis history and helps inform her students on crisis communication strategy. Her goal is to conduct theoretical, grounded research that focuses on helping professionals develop a more effective communications plan so that they can manage reputations well, come up with vetted reputation strategies, as well as evaluate those strategies very pragmatically. Her passion for public relations and the profession is based, again, in research and in evidence, which she also teaches in the classroom. Her goal is to use her professional experience to help students connect with theory and the practice of the development of public relations practices. Dr. Eady's courses help students develop critical thinking skills, and they will always leverage those skills in the profession and for personal success. So with that, Dr. Eady, as well as Karen, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk a little bit more about Gertrude Bailey. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Jenny, if you can pull those slides up, we can get started. So we're talking about Gertrude Bailey today. And I think you'll be interested because it ends with a little discussion about women executives in PR, which Barbara brought up a minute ago. So I think that you will see how this connects to what we were talking about earlier. So we started working on Gertrude Bailey because we read in the trade press that she worked for Monsanto in public relations as early as the 1940s and 50s. And we thought, how in the heck did a woman get a job in such a male dominated industry in that time? So we decided to start digging. So Jenny, if you can flip. All right, just a little bit of background, and then I'm going to let LaShonda actually talk about her PR career. So she was born in 1905 in Michigan. She, in a small town, she grew up there partly, but then moved to Detroit and went to Southeastern High School in Detroit in 1920. Then she started going to college in 1923. She got her degree in journalism and at Michigan. And then she started a journalism career working for a chain of weekly newspapers in Michigan. Next. So shortly after, just a year or two after she started at the weekly newspaper, she went to the Detroit Free Press. And she became that paper's first fashion reporter. And we have a couple clips from articles that she wrote. And she developed this really sort of breezy tone that kind of connected her to the audience. She would say, oh, I saw this and you would love that. And so it made her an expert, but yet still kind of a friend. That tone apparently went over really well because after only a couple of years, she married Harold Bolton. They had a son and daughter, and in the 40s, and they left for Detroit for New York, and she worked at the New York World Telegram and Sun as their fashion editor. And in that job, she got to go to Paris and see the openings and describe all the fashion. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, neither one of us has been able to get a hold of the New York World Telegram to see what she wrote. But the few things that we could find online, it seemed like she continued to develop this sort of expert yet friendly tone in her writings. Next. After that, she went into the PR field. So I'm going to hand it over to LaShonda to discuss that part of it.
Thank you, Karen. So after Gertrude finished her journalism career, she started out at the William S.D. Advertising Agency. They're most well known for their Camel campaign, but Gertrude actually worked on Union Carbide, their Union Carbide account. She didn't stay there for very long, just a couple of years, and then she transitioned over to Monsanto, who at the time was very well known for AstroTurf and also all detergent. And so at the time that Gertrude was crossing over into the public relations industry, well, it seems like only now, but then more than 9% of the industry was women, but for the most part, they were often called upon to help with more domestic type products and promotion. And so, like we've already said, she was a trailblazer in being able to go and work for this chemical company. And so one thing that Gertrude did speak about in, I think the article that Shelley showed at the beginning this evening, she talked about how oftentimes she felt like women in the field, their skills were taken for granted, and that really they could do so much more than just help with the more domestic products. Next slide, please. And so here's just a quote from her, I think from that same article as well. And so you can see that she talked about, you know, what public relations can do for a company, and not only, you know, publicizing it, but also helping the performance. And then also being able to not only take, you know, domestic topics, but also very complex topics and make them interesting and make them applicable to different aspects of life. Next slide, please. And so around the same time that Gertrude went to Monsanto, they were making kind of an entry into consumer goods. And so you could see some examples here of advertisements from that time. And the one thing that Gertrude was able to help them with was actually on packaged goods, where the packaging actually was scented to smell like the actual product. And so that was one of the things she worked on. Next slide, please. And she also helped Monsanto with their House of the Future that was at Disneyland in California. That opened in 1957. And so during that time, I think it was about a 10-year stint that it was there. Over 18 million people came and toured this house. And basically, it was, for that time, the House of the Future that was completely made of plastic, had plastic furnishings on the inside. And so she was instrumental in that as well. Next slide. And so another thing that we wanted to talk about is that Gertrude, from what we've seen so far, and this is still research in progress, that she also gave back. Not only did she make significant contributions to the organizations that she worked for, but she was also very cognizant to help people who came after her. And so she was involved in Fashion Group Incorporated, which was an organization in New York where she served as vice president. And then she also was one of the founding members of the Committee on Women in Public Relations, which was founded in 1946 by Denny Griswold. And so later she served as chair of that organization, and she even continued to serve them during her retirement. Next slide, please. And so I can't remember the year now, sorry, but so the Committee of Women on Public Relations eventually was incorporated and became the Women Executives in Public Relations. And so as an organization, they really purposed to help women in the profession, to provide training and mentoring for them as well. They also were recognized in the Public Relations Journal in 1951, where 18 of their members were featured because of the executive positions that they held. They also created Speakers Bureau, where their members could be invited to speak in their areas of expertise at various organizations. And they also made sure that they provided programming that would really help them not only continue to hone their skills, but also help aspiring public relations women as well. And so you can see some of the topics here that they talked about. And they even hosted dignitaries. So they had First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt at a program. They also had the highest ranking female in the government at the time as well. And in a recount that Gertrude wrote about kind of the history of the organization, she wrote about, how proud they were that what they were doing was not only attractive and attended by women, but men also were there and found value in what they were doing as well. And then they also established a scholarship to help women as well who wanted to go into the public relations industry. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is research in progress, but Karen and I are really excited and honored to share a little snippet about Gertrude Bailey with you, as well as the women execs in public relations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Charmian. Thank you.
Ladies, thank you for enriching us with academia. We know a lot of times in public relations, people don't want to take us seriously until we actually are able to pull vetted research, statistics, things that have been written and that are rooted in history. So we're just so thankful for your practicum, the fact that you followed this career, that you represented our field in academia, and that you are able to come back and share a little bit more about this story. And we're just so thankful for you being here. Okay, well, we're going to move right along in our program, and we'll do safe Q&A for the end, and we'll move along to me introducing Dina Merriam. And then make sure I get Dina on the phone. Hello. And I keep calling it the phone. Everyone will forgive me. I look very young. However, I am not. And so I'm excited to be here on video chat. We've been doing this for a year. You would think I would have it down by now, but Dina, I'm just so excited to have a chat with you. We're going to go a little bit more informal, if you don't mind. And what I will do, though, is make sure I give you the honor of giving a little introduction of you to our audience. And then we'll dive into a conversation if that works for you.
That's great.
Does that work for? Okay, fantastic.
Wonderful.
And let me know. Thank you, Dina. And let me know in the comments how everyone is feeling. Make sure that you take bio breaks and grab coffee, but stay with us because we just are excited about being in your company and having these conversations. So Dina Merriam is a co-founding partner of Finn Partners. She also founded a nonprofit organization called the Global Peace Initiative of Women in 2002. She has worked to bring voices to address global challenges. She's spoken in many forums for the need to shift in consciousness, and that if we are to address successfully the ecological decline, economic and gender imbalance, climate instability, and violence and other critical issues, we must focus on balance and peace and spirituality. Before her own writings, Dina wrote about art and spirituality, publishing a number of books on contemporary artists. And for some years, she's edited the Sculpture Review. Dina earned her master's degree from Columbia University and has served on numerous boards. In 2014, she even received the Nawando Peace Prize for her international work. So we are switching a little bit. We've gone from the making laws and making sure we're representing women in the workplace to really a historical how to PR really start to something that we all know we need, which is focusing on our balance on what is important in the world to continue to bring that to bear in the field of public relations. So Dina, excited to jump in with you. And my first question for you is, so our theme for tonight is how do we use public relations for the social good and for the public good? How can public relations be used for peace building?
Well, I'll tell you some stories of how I got involved. I grew up in the PR industry because my father, David Finn, had founded Rooter Finn in the 1940s, and I began working with him in the early 1980. In the 1990s, we began doing a lot of work with the United Nations. And one of the projects they had was to organize a big peace summit for the millennial year 2000 of religious leaders. I had a background in interfaith studies, my master's. And so my father said to me, perfect for you, you do this project. I had a male colleague I was working with, and we went around the world meeting with religious leaders, trying to get them to come to the UN to support the work of the UN. There was a woman in the Secretary General's office who kept saying to me, make sure you have women at this conference of religious leaders. And every time I'd meet with a religious leader, I'd say, we need some women. Can you recommend some women? And everyone said, why do you need women? We don't have women leaders. I would stay away from that subject. One man said to me, young woman, and I wasn't young at the time, I would not open that door. Don't go there. And so there were very few women at this summit. And it turned out to be anything but peaceful. It was the year 2000. There was a lot of religious conflict going on. But the few women who were there were very unhappy. Reverend Joan Brown Campbell, who was the head of the National Council of Churches, was one of the few women. And she said, we have to do something. So they called upon me to organize a follow-up summit of women religious leaders. So we went back to the Secretary General. He said, good idea, go to Geneva, the Palais des Nations, and hold your women's summit there. So we did. We started working. We had about 750 women we found. All the foundations we had approached for the first summit closed their door. We're not interested in women in religion. And so it was businesswomen who came forward and supported this summit. But the religious leaders in Geneva, when we met with them, absolutely no women leaders. They said, talk about the role of women in faith, but don't call them women religious leaders. Another one said, we're not interested in your American feminism here. This is not the place for you. But we'd been given the Palais des Nations, and so we organized the summit. 3 days before the meeting, we get a notice from the UN. The religious leaders are not happy. You can't use the UN. We have tickets for everybody. They're coming to Geneva. So I said, great, I'm in PR. I'll go to the media and say, UN closes the door on women. They invite the male religious leaders to New York,
Yeah.
the Durham women. Anyhow, they opened the doors. We met at the UN, and it was a very successful summit. And out of that grew the Global Peace Initiative of Women. We developed the Women's Business Council for Peace, where they were doing a lot of work in conflict areas in terms of generating income for women. But my interest was in dialogue because my background is communications. So we began organizing dialogues in Israel, Palestine. It was the height of the Intifada. And it was very difficult at first. But I found we organized dialogues in Sudan and then in Iraq and Afghanistan. We went to all of the hot places. And I found that women have, at that time, it's changed now, of course, like everything else, were excluded from all peace discussions, where they were the ones most affected. It was women and children who were being most affected by conflict, who are most affected by conflict, and yet there was no place at the table for them. And we found that the breakthrough moment always came when they learned how to listen. You know, initially there was a lot of competition of sufferings. My people's suffering is more than yours. And then there comes that moment after 3 days of torture where they actually begin to hear each other. And the unifying thing for women is always the effect on families, the effect on children. I've been in dialogues where there are no women. I'm the representative of my gender. The issue of children never comes up when you're talking about conflict. It's always about political issues. But as soon as you get women together and they're talking about the trauma on the children and the long-term effects, the whole conversation shifts. And so this is what has driven me, the fact that you know, like in every other field, in the area of peace building, women have to be not just at the table, but they have to be shaping the dialogue. This became clear to me. It's not just being at the table, it's shaping the dialogue. It's deciding who's going to be there. It's deciding what topics you're going to cover, what is the agenda going out. So women have to be key because they are the ones on the ground who bear the brunt of conflict.
So there's so much to unpack there because it sounded like you started with one initiative and you kept learning as you traveled, you got on the ground, you sort of understood how it really worked on the ground, you shifted strategies, you had to threaten some men, you got opened up a new platform. Tell us a little bit about sort of as you were organizing, if you will, because that's exactly what you were doing. What type of coalition of women did you have to have around you to sort of convince the people that you need to include in the dialogue and really all of the logistics, especially with world travel and meeting new groups of people? Obviously, you didn't do all that by yourself. So talk a little bit about how you sort of managed your vision and what you saw unfolding in front of you and then brought people along the way.
I found that there's a network of women working in various fields. I mean, business women were crucial to this because often they were the funders. And also they had the capability to help organize a dialogue. We had young people who very much wanted to be. I kind of shifted toward younger people in my last years, especially as I got more into climate change and ecological issues, because it's the younger people who are going to bear the brunt of that. But it was a coalition. We've done programs with women in the State Department. When we were dealing with the Iraqi women, we had to work with the State Department. We worked with the U.S. Institute of Peace. There was a woman there who was very keen on the programs we were doing with the Iraqi women. Now this kind of thing is commonplace, but 20 years ago, women were really left out, and even civil society was not considered important in terms of, this was political matters, UN matters. But Kofi Annan really opened up the UN to civil society. We forget that was a new thing. So the fact that business women and women from academia could get involved. We always had some academics. We always had women from the business, from the political, women who working in nonprofits. I mean, it was a range of women, a coalition of bringing women together to have a voice on peace building.
Yeah. Well, this is incredible. And so you went from peace building and these dialogues, it sounds like you found to have to found an organization to facilitate all this great growth and sort of chronicle some of this in your writings. And so talk to us a little bit about how we got from the peace building pieces to understanding the connectivity to climate and to animals and to the earth and all of the things that go into making, having a strong impact.
Well, we've been doing a lot of our peace building with the UN. So we always kind of consulted the UN wherever we were doing a dialogue. And then an organization came to us and said, we would fund you if you would do a program at the UN Climate Conference, which was taking place in Copenhagen. I think it was 2008, 2009. And we hadn't thought about that before, but we were able to talk about the ethical dimensions of the climate crisis, that this is not just about carbon trading, this is going to affect people's lives. People need to have a voice in this. And so again, it's bringing civil society led by women, but not exclusive to women. We actually had so many men wanting to join our dialogues that we said, you can come as long as you understand that this is a vision organized and held by women. And of course, there are always the men who said, we know how to do it a little better. Let us do that program. We're experienced in that. And, the few women who work with me, we'd look at each other and say, we weren't born yesterday. We've been doing this for so many years now. Thank you, but no, thank you. And so we really now became a very large network of women and men. And the company supports this, because, it's my passion. And so Finn Partners, where I'm now a founding member, a founding partner, will give me resources to help create these dialogues. But environment is a conflict situation because we're in conflict with the earth. We're destroying the very life systems that support life. So that's a kind of conflict. So in order to make peace with the earth, we have to restore the earth. We have to restore the life systems, ecological systems that will enable future generations to have a good life.
Yeah, I fully agree. I often sort of talk with friends, we get into a lot of conversations about race relations in the country or very, American Western centric conversations. And I always remind people that we have, less than 10 years with the global goals to really pay attention to the planet and preserve the earth, in which we all will need. And so we're just, there's such critical work. And I'm glad that you talked a little bit about that. So tell us a little bit more about sort of, you already talked a little bit about why women are good at peace building and why women should be in PR, but talk to us a little bit more about the network. So were you able to sort of retain all of those women around the world to help inform some of the issues that you are working on now, or tell us where you are today, and how the organization and the work is organized?
Our focus has been on emerging leaders, on mentoring young people. We've talked a lot about mentoring in this conference. Men and women, because I feel that the young men are so important also. The young men are very supportive of women. There's a much greater emphasis on gender balance now than when I was growing up, even when in my early professional years. So we do these Zoom conferences now, but previously it was in-person meetings with young environmentalists talking about the interconnections between peace, environment, social equity, all of those things. All the issues are interconnected. And
yes,
you have to deal with them as a whole. You can't just, the problem is the way we think is that you just deal with one and you don't deal with the other. That's changing now. And we're beginning to see the interconnection. But every time, and we've had dialogues on Native American reservations. We've had social justice dialogues here in this country. Because after working abroad for so long, I realized that my country was in conflict. America was in a state of conflict. We're still deeply polarized. We have to use our communication skills now. There's a great challenge before us. And I hope the younger generation really steps up to heal the divisions in our country. And this is a communications challenge.
Yes, it is. I fully agree. So I think, tell us, because we have over 300 people on the phone, how people can plug in. I mean, I agree. And I think many of us on the phone who work on communications campaigns, especially if you've been doing this for more than a decade, start to see how cyclical it is. Sort of the low-income communities or communities that are in poverty are connected to, a lack of food security is connected to lack of education. It's all connected. And we, I think, can work together a lot more to see the through lines and to figure out sort of what to focus on first. And that was my question for you is, what's the latest campaign that you've been working on and how can people potentially plug in?
I think that we have great opportunities now in this country because I think the young people are fired up. They see the possibility for change. And I think that there's sort of an awakening going on that we can't get lip service to change, that there has to be deep systemic change in our system. and it has to filter all the way through to the economic system, to the political system, to the way we socially interact, and the environment is a key part of that. So I'm very glad now that with this new administration, that environment is being brought into every aspect of the government, and that's our main issue here in America now, is how to connect all these issues. And so we're continually building our network of young people. I spent years building a network of women. Now I'm building a network of young leaders, young people in their 20s and 30s.
Fantastic. So Dina, these are going to be like fireside chats and lightning chats, if you will. So what we're going to do is have Q&A at the end with you. And this is an excellent segue over to Fatumata, short for Fatu, who is a PR girl manifesto and a founder of the A&B Media Group. And I think it's a perfect segue to what you were speaking about, Dina, because we'll talk to Fatima about how she has been connecting with the younger generation, and potentially even there's some synergy there. So we'll come back to you in the Q&A, and thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. So Fatu, make sure I can see you. Oh, fantastic. Hello, happy Thursday, and welcome.
Hey.
First of all, how are you doing? We just got off the phone with Dina. I need to check out your core and make sure that you are centered and ready for this really dynamic conversation. We all need to learn from you.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm going to start with your bio because we want to make sure that everyone on the phone understands your background, and then we'll jump right into a dialogue if that's okay.
Of course. Excited.
Fantastic. Okay. So Fatumata B. Berry, short Fatu, is Ghanaian born, NYC raised, and a cultural strategist, best known for her work in communications and community building. Through her creative agency, AB Media Group, Fatu builds authentic and strategic products, platforms, campaigns, and content for the mission of consistent brands that are passionate about making a difference. This is our type of girl, everybody. Fatu is also the founder of PR Girl Manifesto, a digital community of over 40,000 women in the communications field. And her community work reimagines PR in the comm space. It supports constituencies through access, which is very important. We've been talking about that all evening, to resources and fellowships and mentorship. So we went all the way from Muriel and Barbara really laying the foundation and the groundwork and doing work on the laws and making sure that we can even sit in our seats, to Fatu, who has now developed a platform online. When I started PR, there was no Facebook or internet. And so it's very important that we have people who are specialists in the digital organizing and media space, and that we are all thinking about how we can leverage our expertise, whether it's traditional comms or digital integration, to make sure that we're, again, pushing PR for good, making sure that we are focused on PR women who can change history in the world. So Fatu, with that, I'm going to jump into Q&A with you because we have a lot to learn. So my first question for you is, you created PR Girl Manifesto, even though our industry is 80% women. What prompted you to create this network? What is the significance of women in public relations? And then how have you seen it grow as you've gone along the way?
Yeah, so first off, let me just start off by saying I am so honored to be in this space with everyone tonight, to just hear the stories of female PR pioneers, a tongue twister, has been just phenomenal. And it's been so heartwarming because these are the stories that we don't often get to hear. So this is like such a gift. So to answer your question, yes, our industry is 80% women, but within that 80%, there's still barriers that these women are, met with. We have women who are lacking mentorship, who are facing some type of inequity and might really be struggling to grow in the industry. We look at a lot of these reports about the ecosystem of the industry. And the reality is that we find that women are still struggling to find themselves in C-suite and senior level positions. And I even read somewhere recently at the entry level, female to male hires are like roughly 3 to 1. So we're here. But when we're examining leadership roles, that number is actually inverted. So we're not seeing all of these dynamic women in the industry in these leadership positions. So we have all these women who are working under either male CEOs or male-led companies. I think it's about 78%. So yes, we make up 80% of the industry, but it's still pretty male dominated, and there's like visible work to be done for progress. Specifically in answering like why I started PR Girl Manifesto, it really came out of this lived experience of being, a recent graduate, of being a Black young immigrant woman and entering the PR industry and feeling as though I was really struggling to find a resource that spoke to who I was and that unique identity, and what I needed for career progression at that time. And I also wanted to just create a space that not only talked about professional resources, because I think we talk a lot about that, but like the personal things. So being able to network across, feeling like you have community, and engaging with people who had similar experiences or who could lend like a spotlight to a different type of experience. I think PR Girl Manifesto has always been that, and it will continue to be that. At its foundation is this community network. And even as we take on new iterations and do new things, like that is the core of who we are, making sure that there's a soft place to land for women in PR, specifically those who might, have just entered the workforce or have a non-linear trajectory into the PR industry. When you talk about the significance of women in public relations, right? I feel like for me, it's like the significance of women like in any industry or any space or any movement. We contribute so much to the spaces that we're in, and like there are actual studies that show that businesses that have a female dominated management or are led are more likely to perform better than the national average. So if we know that when women are involved in the decision making process, that companies can expect like wonderful results, and why aren't we seeing more women at the leadership position? And then when we talk about then and now, I think we're still trying to make progress, right? So like when I first entered the PR industry, a lot of the things that we're still pushing for right now are things that were issues when I entered. So I think we are like, it's very similar to what Muriel and Barbara mentioned, like we're still fighting, but we're in the fight. And we have an industry that's composed of like brilliant and phenomenal women. And I think it's just like, it's time for us to continue pushing to thrive.
I couldn't have said that better myself. And I think one of the things I've loved about this conversation is that we get to sort of understand, right, too, in our context, like I hadn't even thought about, having the opportunity to work in more traditional comms and working for the first Black First Lady of the United States, and sort of understood the doors they opened. But then also, I always love soaking in history, understanding where some of that foundation came from. I think all the work that you're doing, most of the young women who are coming out of college now are going to be so excited. And it's necessary, quite frankly, for them to have a space to go to learn about themselves, to see themselves in the industry. And then as well, to understand that it's not just, which is my next question, about diversity, equity, and inclusion when we're talking about racial diversity, but when we're talking just about equality overall for different types of communities, the LGBTQIA community, the Native American community is largely underrepresented in the United States of America, but then also, especially in our industry, Asian American Pacific Islander community, as well as the Latina community, right? Yeah. All of these perspectives, I think, are important if we want to come up with powerful campaigns that actually reach people, specifically when we're talking about a deficit of solutions or innovation, right? Which you've been a great innovator. So my next question for you is, and you've already talked about some of the data, but I want to ask you again, because it seems like you have a lot of data in your head, which is awesome. What are some important data points that you recently come across that speak to DE&I issues in our industry, and then, or even around the world? Yeah. And how do we ethically, accurately, and genuinely represent everyone equally, which is a loaded question, but I'm going to drop it there and see what you have to say.
It is. So, I mean, there's so much important data when it comes to DE&I. I think I have been exposed to a lot more of it than I would have been prior because of some of the initiatives that I'm a part of, right? And in one of those, that required us to take a look at the racial and ethnic makeup of the PR industry. And I think for those of us who have been in the industry, we know that PR does have a diversity issue, and that we do have real work to do in terms of ensuring like equity and equality for everyone that works in it. But there's like that 2018 Harvard Business Review, those statistics that keep coming up, right? Where the industry is 87.9% white, it's 8.3% African-American, 2.6% Asian American, and 5.7% Hispanic or Latinx identifying. So when you compare that against the actual makeup of the world where we live in a multicultural world, it's just so interesting that we're in an industry that specializes communicating to diverse demographics. And how can we be putting our best foot forward if the people in charge of communicating to its constituents does not reflect the diversity of said constituents? And you brought up such a good point, is that I think often we get pigeonholed into thinking like, or carrying the belief that DE&I only comes into play when we're talking about racial inequity. But what about all of the marginalized groups that exist that we don't speak enough about? Gender identity, sexual orientation, age, physical ability, language, even immigration status, right? These are all things that exist in this industry, that exist in this world. And there's such a beautiful range to the makeup of humanity. So I think when you ask the question of like, how do we ethically, accurately, and genuinely represent? It's about representation, but I also think it's that's important. But there's this larger thing of like, are we really truly valuing diversity, right? In the work that I do at Hold the Press, we talk about the fact that bottom line, that there needs to be a bottom line in the industry that is DE&I. We need to recruit, we need to develop, and we need to retain talent that not only reflects like our client demographics, but that reflects the demographics of the world. We need to be advocating in our work for voices from marginalized communities to be present in the room and to also center those voices. And knowing that there's not a one size fits all approach to DE&I, like absolutely not. But I think what's so great and the potential that the PR industry has is that we can use our careers as a vehicle for advocacy, because we're communicators. If anything that we've learned, I think even in this time of hearing from all these dynamic women, especially when you and Dina were having that conversation, is that communicators and PR individuals and PR professionals have such a unique I think position in how we shape the stories that are being told about the world, about groups, about people. Like, why wouldn't we communicate? Why wouldn't we speak up? Why wouldn't we use that as our tool and our vehicle for advocacy and really to like reimagine the work that we do as PR professionals, especially women in PR in this space?
I couldn't have said that better myself. And I think one of the key things that you brought up is just understanding the DE&I space and not sort of continuing to innovate in that space. And what does that look like? And how do we do that? Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a twist. How are people of color and people who are from disadvantaged or underrepresented groups, what is the wrong way to approach attracting them into the industry? And if you've had any personal experiences that you feel like sharing, sort of share a little bit more with us about what you think works really well for companies, and then what you think does not work as well as we're expanding and innovating in our field.
Yeah, so I have this phrase that I live by, because in one of my clients we talk about it. It's this idea that you can't be what you can't see. So I think if we're looking to attract more diverse individuals into this space, we have to be able to reflect the same people that we're trying to bring into this space internally. It's really hard, I think, for individuals, in my own experiences, my perspective is only the lens of me being a Black immigrant woman. Getting into the industry was very hard. And to imagine the range of possibility, which is why women like you are so important, Charmian, because it's like, you can't be what you can't see. If I don't know that there's a Charmian Kinder out there in the world that is doing these things and that is in this position, how will I imagine that for myself? So when I talk about centering these voices and centering these individuals, it's not just enough to have someone on the team. Are you listening to them? Are you pushing those individuals to the forefront because they have something to say and they want to they want to represent their community? So I think when we're talking about attracting people into this space, it's really about making sure that before we tell somebody, hey, there's a space for you, or you are represented, why are we showing? I mean, why are we telling? Why are we not showing them that we have a diverse industry, that we, our internal makeup, our diversity numbers are there, and not because we're trying to meet a quota, but because we genuinely value. It has to be a genuine thing. I think what we're seeing now is that people are waking up to the reality that we're not as diverse as we thought that we were. And I think in that awakening and in that reckoning, we're really starting to think about how we communicate, what spaces we take up, how we let other people take up. And also another thing too is really being able to like do the work of exploring like all these groups that are out there. And what I mean by that is, for example, for me, internet accessibility has never been something that I've worried about, because I have the privilege of not, having to worry about that. So one thing that we've incorporated now is closed captions on our videos, alternate captions, like image descriptions. Those are things that, like, if I were someone that wanted to enter, this space, and I was a person with a disability, how would I think that I could have a role or a lane in this industry if I don't see anything that like supports my identity and
Such a good point.
Yeah, so like I think it's really, we all have to actively do the work. I have unconscious bias the same way somebody else has unconscious bias. It's not just like singular to one person. No, we all have some form of privilege and unconscious bias that we have to like sit through and really explore to make sure that we're making this industry as accessible and as diverse as possible.
Fatu, that was dynamic. I am sure everyone on the phone got just as much from that conversation and all of your knowledge as I did. I am elated to have had this conversation with you, and I understand that we have a little bit of fun for our audience and that you were going to help us with the raffle. And so I'm going to turn off my camera and then I'm going to come back.
Awesome. Yes. So we have some fun for everyone. To help remember some of the stories that we've heard on today's show, we are raffling off 3 fantastic educational books on PR women in history. Your attendance is actually your ticket. And after the show, the museum is going to choose winners at random for each book. Keep an eye out on social media tomorrow, Friday, March 12th, where those winners will be announced. And winners will receive an email with next steps following the announcement. The books up for grabs are Maryland, A Woman in Charge by Dick Martin from PR Museum Press, Community Building and Early Public Relations, Pioneer Women's Role on and After the Oregon Trail by Donalyn Pomper, Women in PR History by Anastasios Theophilosios, which includes a chapter on Inez Kaiser, the first Black woman to open a PR firm. Good luck. I believe we're going to open it up to question and answer now. So I think if everybody wants to turn on their cameras, yes. Hi.
Woohoo!
Woo, right. Wonderful. So the first question we have, and both of these questions are actually open to anyone who might want to answer. The first from Thomas, what is the message to today's youth? Why do they choose public relations as a profession? That's scared.
I have to raise my hand like my students. I think that the title of the panel is the answer to the question. It's students or anyone, kids these days, whatever you want to say, are turned on by the idea of being able to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And when you show them that you can use your skills in public relations to change the world, they are on fire. They're ready to go.
Yes, I love that. Does anybody else want to have any ideas?
Repeat the question one more time. I might have an answer.
Yeah. What is the message to today's youth? Why do they choose public relations as a profession?
Oh, I would say, listen, if not now, when? If not you, who? Because we have so many challenges to solve for in the world. It can't be done without voices from all communities. And specifically in PR, we're always sort of trying to either solve a challenge for a company, or there's just so many things that you can do with your passion. But certainly, this is not an industry for people who don't care about the issues they're writing about every day for 10 to 12 to 13 hours a day for their whole life, And so it's just really imperative that you show up and use your voice in order that nothing will change, as we have seen throughout the entire thread of this evening, without your voice. It will go on as is. And so I just think it's imperative for people to feel like they belong, that they lean in if they feel like they don't belong, to really center themselves and understand that they do, and to do the work to show up with their authentic voice, because that's where our profession will get better.
Yes, I love that.
And I would also add that communications is an invaluable skill, learning how to communicate effectively. And none of the problems can be solved without good communication skills. And so many of the problems come about because of poor communication skills. So it's you can apply these skills to any area that you're passionate about.
Donna Lynn?
Thanks, Fatu. In addition to teaching public relations, I also teach ethics across the School of Journalism and Communication. So I have advertising students, journalism students, media studies students. And the quality that I am most encouraged about is not only do these young people want to change the world, but they know how to use media to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They know more about media than any previous generation. And they are indeed fired up. They're almost natural storytellers. I feel it's my job just to kind of navigate them and steward them into directing their passion into the places where they want to see themselves. So I really love what you said, Fatu, about, you can't be it unless you see it, because that's so important. So thank you so much for saying that.
Yes. Dina, we have a question for you. Why do you think that women are better at peacemaking than men?
Listening skills. I think we've been making peace in our families for generations. And I think also we know how to build consensus. I think that these are just things that women have been doing informally. Listening as part of our work, our lives, and also building consensus. And I think that I've seen in these summits that I've organized that many of the men just kind of project and talk and don't really sit in a circle together and connect with the people. So I think these are specific skills that women have. Learning how to listen and learning how to navigate difficult relationships, other difficulties.
I love that. Charmian, what can women give to the PR industry that men never could?
Well, I think we are natural nurturers, and we listen to each other and we work together very well. We naturally will care about community because we care about our children, we care about our husbands, we care about our families, and we have an innate, I think, if you will, sense of, hey, we need to reach across the aisle, we need to reach around the circle, and we need to pull everybody in so that everyone here is safe. I think women understand that just because of the roles that we play outside of our jobs every single day. I think that men can do that if they practice and they work well and they have empathy and they step outside of how they are normally treated in the world, right? But I think we naturally know how to do that and we understand the importance of it. So I think that's our magic, our special sauce. And it's something that's important, and why I think the industry has 80% women and why we've been effective is because we are able to work together very well and communicate with a certain level of empathy that people don't have naturally.
Yes. LaShonda, the next question is for you. Why isn't someone like Gertrude Bailey in the history books? And more specifically, why aren't people of color in those books?
Because the scholars have to uncover those stories, and then after that, which can take some time, we also have to get with those who are publishing the books and insist that they include them, which I think is a tall order, not impossible, but there's just a lot more work to be done as far as that's concerned.
Yes. Karen, oh, yes, Donalyn.
If I may piggyback on what LaShonda just said, I agree 100%, because we just did a panel about this very issue. One of the challenges is publishers don't always want to change chapters as regularly as we'd like them to. Mm-hmm. I and one of my graduate students just completed a study, and it's going to be coming out in the Journal of Public Relations Education, where we surveyed PR faculty, asking them what they do when they teach PR history. And we discovered that they're finding the supplemental resources that they want to use from the Museum of PR and other resources. So we are providing these stories. It just requires a lot of extra work on our part because it's not in the intro to PR textbook. But I'm going to wager that's going to be changing pretty soon, because the word is out that we're not going to take it anymore.
Yes. Karen, I have a question for you. You seem to know a lot about PR history. Why is it important for PR students to learn about history?
I tend to think that history is just fun anyway. So I've never really tried to think about why I should justify it. But I think that the way PR history has been written in the past is mostly been about white men, specifically working in corporations or agencies, and it's been a very narrow picture of who's in PR. I think that doing the work like LaShonda and I and Donna Lynn and other people are doing to bring more people of all different kinds into the picture will inspire students to see that, oh, actually women have been in PR, and Inez Kaiser was in PR, and bringing these people in, I think, broadens the conversation to show that it's although it's great to have Charmaine, there's other people before her too that we should also be celebrating and including in our history.
Yeah, it's so important. As we had the pleasure of hearing from everyone earlier, I was just like, why is there not a woman in PR class? Why is that not required? Because it really feels like a little bit of an erasure, of like the contributions that women have made in this industry and in this space. So now I'm like, why aren't we petitioning for a class about women in PR? I think it's so important. I'm going to have a couple more questions. Dina, how can young women in PR do the kind of peacemaking work that you've been doing?
When I started, there was some women at the company who they wanted to focus on the business aspect of peacemaking. I was more interested in the dialogue. So they formed the Women's Business Council for Peace. And they began working in Rwanda with some of the widows, and they got their baskets into Macy's and were being sold in Macy's. They worked in Afghanistan with women starting hair salons. There are many, many ways that you can get involved in peace building, either by starting your own organization or looking at some of the organizations that are out there. My organization, the Global Peace Initiative of Women, we have a website. We have all of activities are available. And so there are many ways. You just have to see where your passion is. But I think that the message that I got early on was that civil society has to get involved. We can't leave it to the political leaders, that we all have a role to play in building a more caring, sustainable, and peaceful world.
I love that. I have a question that's open to everyone, actually from Carlos. Were these women aware of how influential they would become in the continued fight for equality? The things they achieved in such a male-dominated era leads me to believe that they in fact thought of themselves as trailblazers. What do you all think?
Are they talking about us? Who are we talking about?
I think we're talking about the women that we learned about.
Learned about. Sorry. I was like,
I mean, I consider you all trailblazers, so it applies, but.
No. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, I think if you include Barbara and Muriel, sure, they knew. And the Gertrude Bailey that LaShonda and I talked about, she definitely knew because she used her power and her influence to help other women. And I've studied a few other women in PR that we haven't talked about today, like Flanley Woodward, who opened the first all-female PR agency in New York in 1944. And they specifically said, like we heard earlier, oh, I'm not a feminist, but I run my own company, and you know what I mean, kind of like that. So that's one thing I've admired about Gertrude Bailey from what we've learned so far, is that she did not say that. She was active in causes for women and promoting women and using her position for the good of other women, not just herself.
Yes. Donalyn, I have a question for you. How did you become interested in Pioneer Women? Oh, I think you're on mute. I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, there we go. Years and years ago, I read a book about manifest destiny, and wasn't Glenda Riley, but it was another woman who is a historian writing about women in the West. And on the cover of her book, she put a really interesting photograph of a Caucasian woman and an African-American woman, pioneers. So I came to Oregon 4 years ago looking for those stories. Unfortunately, I didn't find any of those stories here at the University of Oregon, but I'm not finished yet. You know, I'm going to continue looking for them because what fascinating dynamics those were. I mean, I do know that in conjunction with the Civil War there in the middle of the 1800s, African Americans did come west, but they had a very different experience than the Caucasian pioneers. So there are lots more stories that need to be told. Thanks, Fatu. That's a really good question.
Yes, and to that, Karen, I want to ask you a question as well. How do we generate interest among students today in history? Not only those that are aspiring to be PR professionals, but people like the pioneers that Donna Lynn shared with us and described.
So we have had some conversations about this as PR faculty recently. So drawing on the panel that Donna Lynn was referring to earlier, we came up with a couple of things. One was getting students to do their own research on pioneers, where they could pick anyone that interested them, and it didn't matter if they ran an agency or they were a pioneer. And the other thing was suggested by Denise Hill from Elon. She said that she takes events and she asks the students to find out who did the promotion behind it, and then that gets them into it. So they can do like Woodstock or whatever interests them, because somewhere there was someone promoting that, right? It didn't just happen spontaneously, even though that's kind of how they talk about it today. So that's another way to, so what you're doing is like figuring out what the student is interested in first, and then finding a way to connect that to PR history.
I love that. Dina,
Karen, tell them about your wiki project. Don't be so modest.
Yes, tell us.
Well, just real quickly, I had students write Wikipedia entries on people in PR history because what was on there was so bad. So I had them do secondary research and then write entries about people who had been overlooked and make sure that they're included. So when someone looks up, which we know they shouldn't go to Wikipedia, but they do, puts a name in or puts a subject about public relations history, that some people will come up that are not the same usual suspects that are on every single PR textbook.
So I have a question for everyone, and I think I would love for everyone to answer it. And that is, if I can pull it up, is how you personally use PR for the public good, or how women in PR can. I don't know who wants to go first. Yes, Donald.
When I teach public relations classes, I position public relations as a powerful position acting as an inside activist, an insider activist for organizations, and working to build those really important relationships between organizations and the external stakeholders, and being the advocate from the inside for those external stakeholders.
Yes, I love that. Let's go next. Should I repeat the question?
Yes, you can repeat it.
Yeah, okay, no worries. The question is, how do you personally use PR for the public good, or how women in PR can?
I think similarly to what Donalyn was saying, especially in the classroom, from day one in the principal's class, I always make sure that my students understand that, working in public relations is a huge responsibility, and, in some instances can be life-changing, like the work that Charmian was talking about earlier, but, even down to local nonprofits and what organizations are doing in their communities. What we do matters. Like Donalyn said, there is power that comes with it, and we just have to remember that, make sure what we're doing is ethical, and that we remember at the end of the day, even though the bottom line is important, especially for for-profit organizations, that we still have to make sure that we're being good corporate citizens and working to do public relations in a way that's beneficial also to our communities and publics.
Yeah. I can add to that. I think the hardest thing in the industry is turning away clients. We all face issues where, I mean, and it's easier to do today than it was 20 years ago. I remember when my company worked in the 70s for Philip Morris, and there had to come a time, cigarette company, there had to come a time when we say we won't work for tobacco. And then there was asbesto. We won't work for asbesto. We won't work for gun manufacturers. I mean, you have to sort of decide what products you're going to promote. And of course, with more information, it's getting you know, there are more and more clients you want to turn away. I mean, all kinds of chemical companies with all the chemicals in the environment. And there's much more transparency today than there was 20, 30 years ago. So I think that's the greatest challenge for PR people, is being able to really decide what products, what messages you want to promote that are really going to help society progress and safeguard the health and well-being of people and planet. So it used to be people, but now it's people and planet. We have to protect people and planet.
Charmian and Karen, do you have any input?
Well, I'll have Karen go first. I've been talking all evening, so I've been running. Karen, I will defer.
No, I really don't have anything to add. I think you have covered it.
I love it. It has been a pleasure to spend time with everyone here. I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful and dynamic MC, who I know you were like, you've been talking, but it's throwing it right back to you, back to Charmian to wrap this up for us.
Well, thank you again, ladies, for joining us, and everyone who has been on the phone with us since 6 o'clock. And I keep calling it the phone, the video conference element, since 6 o'clock, talking about PR women who changed history by using public relations for good. How powerful is that? The industry was not necessarily here 50 years ago, and we had a chance to hear from Muriel Fox and Barbara Hunter, who helped shape the industry, to help get us in the door, to make sure that this was even something that you can do and make a living doing, is advocating on behalf of people around the world. And Grace came and brought a really excellent synopsis of her perspective and that mentorship and how it helps her be a leader, not a boss, but a leader in her company, which also allowed other women to come along. And we understood the importance of academic study and creating a record of what we've done, so that we can look at the trail of it later on and understand how to do it better. And so Dr. Russell, Dr. Karen Miller Russell, and I apologize for not saying doctor earlier, Dr. LaShonda Edie, Dr. Pomper, and then even Dina brought to us all different types of perspectives of how do you do PR for international good and peace building. How do we make sure that we're chronicling the story so that we can evolve history books as they are growing? There's a lag with history, so you got to write about it and make some history, and write about it and make some history, and do some of it at the same time, so we understand the value and the importance of that. And then even you, Batu, who are leading the way, coming and dropping all the knowledge about stats that I haven't even heard myself, and helping to give us a perspective on what it means when we say inclusion and belonging, what it means when we're saying look around the room and see if you have people who you're talking about in that room. That doesn't just mean Black or Latino women. That has evolved. We know that's not accurate any longer. We have to look at people who have physical disabilities. We have to look at other niche groups that are underrepresented. We need to make sure that we're including younger people. We need to make sure that we're talking about communities that have been underrepresented overall globally, which is what I do at Global Citizen. So thank you for bringing that perspective to us. It was just enriching. It was my honor to be here. I have learned a lot. I wish that I could see everyone who has been at home listening to us, and I would be remiss if I did not shout out all of our sponsors for making this evening happen. Thank you so much. They're on the website, and I have not gotten talking points, so I'm going to direct you to the website for all the sponsors, but we are thankful. And I just want to also definitely give personal thanks to the PR Museum, to Shelley for even creating this space, and Jenny for helping us organize this. We talked a little bit about race relations a little bit earlier, and you look at the phone, there are 3 Black women talking about public relations, and that happened here with the Museum of Public Relations. And so I think that I was, first of all, honored to be excited and to moderate, but the fact that we still have women leading, innovating, coming up with solutions, not talking about problems, but talking about how we're going to fix challenges and overcome them and create new. and it's an honor to be in this space with everyone this evening to do so. We hope that you will come back for the next event, and we're just so thankful for your time. With that, I think we can probably sign off and have an excellent evening. Thank you so much for the work you do.